ClancyPasta presents I'm an Uber driver. Last week, I picked up someone Inhuman. Written by WestFunction and narrated by Clancy. I'm in college in a pretty rural part of the country. I won't get more specific than that. The important part is about halfway through this past semester, I was running pretty low on cash. I searched out a job on campus for a while, but I just couldn't bring myself to work retail or be at a desk answering phones all day. I only decided to drive for Uber because I could make my own hours and basically work as little or as much as I wanted. Plus, most of the time my passengers were students, so it allowed me to meet people on campus I might not have met otherwise. For a while, it was actually a really good gig. There were some late-night puke rides and even a couple drunkenly handsy guys in my front seat, but overall, I felt like I was making good money and not really working too hard. Until last week. I didn't have any plans for last weekend, so I decided I would go out and be a good Samaritan, driving drunk college kids home safely. I knew I'd make good money because there would be a surplus of people who needed a reliable ride, so I didn't really have anything to lose. I would wait in the McDonald's parking lot and read my book or play on my phone while waiting for someone's ride request to come up on screen. I'd pick them up, bring them home, drive back to the parking lot, repeat. I started driving around 11 p.m. and planned on finishing up around 3. Since most rides were just going between buildings on campus, I knew I'd be able to get a lot of drives within that 4-hour period. Everything went pretty smoothly, a couple of close calls with vomit and my leather interior, but no true disasters. I was getting tipped pretty well, despite the inebriation of the passengers I was picking up, and everyone, for the most part, was really friendly. At about 1, I got a notification that someone had requested a ride. The pickup spot was really close, one of the old apartment buildings about 10 blocks away from the lot I'd been idling in. Looking closer, I noticed where the ride was heading. It was some random address a few towns over, much farther than I'd gone with any of my other drives that night. In the moment, this actually made it more appealing to accept, since obviously the longer the ride, the more I get paid. It didn't seem like a sketchy area or anything like that, so I accepted the request and turned over the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I realized I'd been sitting there reading my book for almost a half hour. I guess it had been a slow point of my night, and I turned around to see if there were a lot of other cars around. Weirdly, everything was off. The street lights, the window lights of any nearby businesses, even the McDonald's inside lights were off, although I swore the one I was parked at was 24-hour. I brushed it off, figuring everything was just finally closing up for the night, and that I wasn't usually out late enough to see the street lights be turned off. It only took me 4 or 5 minutes to get to the address where I was supposed to pick this guy up. He didn't have a profile picture, but his name was Mark. It also seemed like he didn't have any rider ratings, meaning his account was either brand new or he just never used it. I made a right turn onto the street where the address was located, and as I looked around, I started to think maybe someone pranked me. The street was completely residential, which wasn't out of the ordinary for the area, but all the houses were completely dilapidated. Graffiti, broken windows, boarded up front doors. I couldn't imagine anyone possibly living there, let alone having a party there. My house hunting was interrupted by the sound of my phone telling me I was approaching the destination on my right. I looked down the street and I could just barely make out the shape of who I assumed was the person I was picking up, standing on the front lawn. As my car inched closer, I could see that he was really just standing there. It didn't look like he had a phone in his hand or anything. Even stranger, he was waving. Not waving at me, my car wasn't even close enough for him to be doing that. He was out on the lawn, facing across the street, just waving at nothing. I really thought once I approached the final destination, I would see some newer, fancier house built on the street that I'd just never seen before. I was very wrong. The house that I approached, which was behind the lawn my passenger was standing on, looked almost more broken down than the rest. The roof had completely caved in, and you could see the old rooms through broken parts of the wall. None of the windows had any glass, and the front door had been completely ripped off its hinges. Wind ripped through the frame, shaking the entire house. It was definitely not somewhere livable. I stopped the car right in front of the lawn, which is when I finally got a chance to focus on the man's frame for a brief moment. He was tall, lanky even, and had clothes on that didn't seem like they fit or matched. His pants cut off around his mid-calf and hugged his legs extremely tight, while his t-shirt moved with the wind around him, hardly touching his body. He had no coat on despite it being winter, but wore a fedora. His shoes were absolutely huge, looking almost disproportionate to his body. His face looked relatively normal, like a thin man in his early 30s. His cheekbones were very pronounced, and his eyes sunk hollowly backward into his skull. He was still waving, but now his eyes shifted focus to me. "Hi, here for Mark?" I rolled down my window about halfway. "Yes." The man started ceasing his wavings. His hand hung motionless in the air for a moment, before returning to his side. He didn't break eye contact with me until he took a step to open the car door. Normally, when people are taking an Uber alone, they just sit up in the front seat, but Mark moved to the back door and sat on the rear right seat, diagonal to me. For some reason, this sent a shiver up my spine, knowing that he could basically just watch me drive without me noticing. After directing my phone to start the navigation, I decided to start a conversation. "So, what brings you out tonight?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. Our eyes met. I met some friends," he muttered. His voice was sharp and gravelly, and by his tone I could tell he didn't want to talk. Usually when I drive for Uber, I don't turn on my radio, since I know many people have strong feelings about music. I let him have his space and drove in silence for a few minutes, almost forgetting he was there until his voice piped up from the back seat. "Hey, do you mind if I eat?" I thought about it for a moment. Normally, I would say no, but for some reason, I just felt like I really didn't want to make this guy mad. He was bigger than me, after all. Definitely big enough to overpower me. As a relatively small woman, I knew I needed to be cautious about who I was angering. "No, that's fine." I saw him nod in the rear view before pulling up a bag from his feet that I hadn't noticed him having before, and I focused my eyes back on the road as he unwrapped his food. Another minute or so of silence passed, again leaving my mind nearly vacant of his presence. It honestly hadn't even sounded like he was eating anything, until the sound of his initial bite brought me out of my mental autopilot. Crunch. The sound was wet and loud. I didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that something strange was happening, but I was too freaked out to not sneak a glance. I wish I hadn't. When I looked into the rear view, I just saw teeth. Not long, sharp teeth, but normal human ones. Rows of them. His entire jaw had unhinged and expanded to the point where I could see all the way down his throat when he opened his mouth. And I would guess probably 8 or more rows of teeth spread back into his head. Blood dripped from the sides of his mouth down his chin, and he hardly even swallowed his previous mouthful before biting into the next piece. I quickly shifted my gaze back to the road before he could make eye contact with me. I'd forgotten to breathe until that moment, and it took everything in me not to swerve to the side of the road and take off running. I had no idea what to do, so I just kept following the directions. My phone said I only had another 3 or 4 minutes to go until I reached his destination, but now I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go there. Crunch. I just kept driving. Every time he took a bite, I could hear the sound of blood splattering against a nearby surface. I knew that no matter where I was taking him, I just wanted him out of the car as fast as possible. 2 minutes to go. Crunch. All the streetlights were still out, and I hadn't seen a single car since I left the pickup spot. I was praying for someone to just drive by, see me panicked, see what was happening in my car, and stop. As I looked out onto further nearby streets, everything looked desolate. There was no one to see this. 0.5 miles to the destination. Crunch. My heart was throbbing harder than I'd ever heard it before. I wouldn't let myself look back again, out of fear he would see me. I knew what was happening back there wasn't something I was supposed to see, and I had to just pretend I couldn't. I made 2 more turns until finally, I made a right onto the street where the destination was. To my horror, it was the exact same street I'd picked him up on. Same empty houses, same graffiti, same uneasiness. I didn't know how it could be possible. I'd followed the directions perfectly. It was the only thing that allowed me to redirect my focus from my passenger. Sure enough, my navigation ended in front of the same dilapidated house I'd been summoned to. As I screeched my brakes to a stop, I could hear him gnawing on the last bit of something tough. "Here you are," I said. Seeing that he was finally still, I let myself glance back in the rear view again. Our eyes immediately met. His lips curled to a smile, exposing his inhuman teeth. He was covered in blood. It dripped down his neck and onto his baggy shirt, making almost the entire thing wet and stained. His pupils had rolled back, exposing only the whites of his eyes, but somehow I knew he was looking at me. His head seemed huge. "Thank you so much. Have a great night." Without breaking the stare, he reached over and pulled open the handle door, shuffling his thin body until he could throw his feet out onto the pavement. Holding the frame of the door, he lifted himself up and out. When the door finally shut, I couldn't help but to watch him move back toward his original spot, where he was standing when I picked him up. He had such a rickety nature about his movement, almost like he never truly learned how to walk. As if by instinct, he stopped in the exact spot that I'd first seen him, and faced out toward the street. As I accelerated down the road, his bloody gaze followed me through the window. Even after I was far enough to only see him in the rearview mirror, I could tell his stare hadn't broken. He was waving. The next morning I got up to discover that my car had no evidence of him ever being there. No blood, no food, nothing. My Uber app hadn't even acknowledged that I'd made the drive, which was maybe the worst part. I had no proof that any of this happened. I seriously considered that maybe this was all a dream, after all. A product of my long night of driving. But it was just too real. I've had bad drives before, although nothing like this, and normally I would just allow myself to forget about it and move on. But it occurred to me, if he really had ordered a drive with me through Uber, it means he has my phone number. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/ClancyPasta, or click the join button below to become a member. Through Patreon, you can gain access to extra videos, on-screen thanks in the end credits of every video, personal shoutouts in a special video once a month, autographed stickers, merch store discounts, exclusive Discord roles, and much, much more. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store, creepycoolshirts.com, for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.